James, good morning. It's good to see you again.
A very good day to you, Mark.
Why don't you tell everyone your name and a bit about yourself?
Okay, so I'm James Innes. I'm commonly known in the UK media as the Jobs Guru, maybe a slightly silly moniker with an interesting story behind it. But if people ask me what I do for a living, I generally say I work in recruitment. It's the simple answer. But really, I'm an expert on CVs, cover letters, LinkedIn profiles, interview technique, interview coaching, careers coaching. Everything on the candidate side to help people move onwards and upwards and get the job they want, the job they deserve. I started a business in the UK 26 years ago now, doing that, the CV Centre, now a multinational group, I think about 16 countries. I've written a few books along the way, Ultimate New Job, the interview book, the interview question and answer book, the cover letter book, and indeed the CV book. So you can see I literally
I've
wrote
seen
the
that
book
one
on
before.
CVs. I also do a lot of TV and radio work. I'm a commentator for BBC News, and I think for about 6, maybe 7 years now, I've had a weekly column in a national newspaper. So an expert on CVs, everything on the candidate side, everything that goes with that.
Fantastic. So we've got a candidate guru, if you like. Maybe that could be your new moniker.
Candidate guru, and any kind of guru will suit me just fine.
I like it, mate. I like it. We've done a little bit of work before in the past. We had a candidate who was a relatively senior candidate, a head of transformation type candidate, I think paid around 2,000-ish a day. You helped him prepare his CV, LinkedIn profile, and so forth. Now, the feedback from him was outstanding. You know, he really enjoyed the interaction with you. And the CV, well, the difference in the CV was huge in terms of what we saw. It enabled us to put it in front of several clients who appreciate a well-written CV. Can you tell us a bit more about sort of what you did, what the process was, how that worked?
Okay, so I think you need to look first at what is a CV needed for, what's the importance of the CV. A lot of people think they can just write their own CV. Well, you can, but it's perhaps not going to get you that far. I think there's two main goals for a CV. One is to get your foot in the door for an interview. That's the most obvious one. But there's also further down the line the importance at interview itself of it being used by the interviewer as like an agenda to their interview. Now, I personally don't deal with that many clients these days myself, and they're all at a pretty high level around the world. And people say to me, well, why are these senior executives coming to you, James? Surely they can write their own CV. Well, they might be extremely good at what they do, whether it's achieve this or achieve that, whatever they might be doing. They're obviously experts in their own fields. But when it comes to writing a CV, I've been doing it day in, day out for like a quarter of a century. So I know what the employers are looking for. I know what the recruiters are looking for. With this particular case, we started off with we had a good long chat. I think about half of that was probably trying to extract further information, particularly about what he'd done most recently, trying to dig deeper, understand the difficulties and challenges of his most recent role and the highlights, the achievements, what he's proud of. And the other half was also getting to know him. It's like I say, I do work in recruitment, but actually it's more marketing that I work in. I see the client, the candidate as a product or a service. It's my job to market them to the best of their ability. And you can only do that when you get to know and understand somebody. It's also the same for the interview process too. Most good recruiters, about half of it will be, can they really do the job? They say they can on paper, but can they? And the other half, are they the right fit? Are they the right mindset? Do we actually want to work with them? Do we want to buy into this package? So with Dean, I should have mentioned his name, should I?
Let's not mention his name.
No, it slipped out. So with this particular individual, I said we started with a good long chat. Then obviously we took his existing CV, worked through it and thought, what do we need here? What are the key messages we're trying to get across? So obviously key selling points, those key messages, as with all forms of marketing, but also key differentiators. What sets him apart from his peers? Others competing with him for the same opportunities. That's absolutely critical. As obviously the jobs market gets increasingly competitive, and more CVs are piled upon recruiters. So trying to get that edge to stand out is very difficult. I often liken it to a horse race. Only one horse wins the race, and that horse might do so by a nose. So small differences can really have a big result.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, one thing that you said earlier, and I guess this relates to the interim managers that we work with as well as the permanent candidates, but probably more so on the interim management side. And that is that, you've got an interim manager, they're relatively senior, maybe 2,000 a day-ish, sort of exec -1 type level individual. And in their chosen subject, whether it be operations, finance, ERP systems, whatever it is, they're the chosen expert in that field. And they go in and support some of our clients at board level, so board sponsored or business critical, board important type roles. And they go in there as the resident expert. And when I speak to interim managers, they're really clear about, I can't do what the CFO can do, I can't do what the CEO can do, but I can do this particular part of their remit and I can do it well. Now, if they have that mindset in terms of how they're pitching for work, I'm sure they can relate to having the same mindset in hiring someone to write the CV who's an expert at writing CVs. It kind of makes sense.
I also get asked along similar lines by a lot of people, you actually deal with chief human resources officers. Yes, I do. Well, surely they've seen millions of CVs. They must know how to write their own one. It's like, I don't listen to music. Yeah, we all listen to the radio all our lives. Doesn't mean we can go out and write a song. It's the same sort of thing. Seeing hundreds, thousands of CVs doesn't mean you can actually write one yourself. You're not an expert in marketing yourself. You're not an expert in how to market candidates to recruiters and potential employers. The only way we can do that is obviously through experience, by talking to employers, by talking to recruiters, seeing what works, understanding what they need out of a CV, because any piece of writing should be with the reader in mind, understanding what they need, what they want, and making sure that we deliver that. We understand that through years of experience, but even a C-suite executive doesn't necessarily understand that themselves.
Yeah, I like that. I like that thinking in terms of, have the other person in mind. We have a bit of a saying in our business, which is it's always about them, which really means it's not about us. And I say the same to the interim managers and to the permanent candidates that we represent. When you're in front of the client, make it all about them, even from a CV
What do they want? What do they need? What is their pain? How can you help to relieve that?
Yeah, and also, if they're recruiting, it could be that they're not an expert at recruiting. We all assume because they're a chief exec or CFO that they'll be experts at recruiting. Often they're not, and you've got to make as a candidate, you've got to make their life easier. How do candidates do that? How do the candidate make the interview process easy for the interviewer?
Okay, yeah, that's an excellent point. I see a CV, two goals. One is to get your foot in the door. Many people have their foot in the door already, but the recruiter, the potential employer, will still want to see the CV. And one of the reasons is they will use it as an agenda for the interview. Now, you and I, and many people watching this, will have interviewed people in the past. We know what it's like. We're busy. It's a tough day. We're short on time. We've got that meeting. We know we've got to interview somebody, but we know what we're interviewing for. We know what we need somebody for, but we don't know anything about them. We get in there, and we're going to use that interview as a cheat sheet, as an agenda for the interview. So we'll go in, we'll say hi, whatever your name is, and greet them, etc. And then we're like, right, so where do we go from here? We know what we want, but we don't know anything about them. Look down, CV. They need to be able to scan that quickly and readily and go straight to the questions they want to ask, normally focusing on achievements, normally recent achievements, current or past role. If they look down at that CV, they're confused in any way, they can't get their head around you, well, that's going to be a problem in an interview, but it will probably have been a problem before that. If a recruiter faced with a stack of CVs to shortlist goes through them and gets to one where they just, I can't work this person out, it's not clear to me, they're not going to spend time trying to work it out. They will just throw it into the bin, basically, and move on to the next person. So clear, concise, readable, easy to scan, both to get through that first stage, to get to the interview, and also for the interview process itself, to facilitate their process as an interviewer, and using it as an agenda for that interview.
It's exactly the same as what we speak. I mean, we've got similar experience in terms of industry, sort of 25 years-ish. And I always say the same thing, and that is, the client or the person who's interviewing is going to be using this as a script. How easy are you going to make it for them? Because if you make it start to flow and make it easy for them, the feedback, as a recruiter, the feedback that I get is either, we didn't connect with that person or we got on famously. And then they start talking about skills and experience and skill match and things like that. But, we're all human. We all need that sort of initial connection. And it's amazing how much the CV can sort of preempt how good that connection's going to be.
Yeah, so I mean, it's making it easier for them, yes, but it's also, and this sounds slightly manipulative, but trying to get them to ask the questions you want them to ask by clearly featuring those achievements, etc., leading their eye. Obviously, a CV is a mixture of content and design. And these days, actually, design's half the battle. 25 years ago, a CV was a simple typed document. 10 years ago, nobody used color. Now everybody uses color. Design has evolved enormously, and that's a really important part of it. So it's leading their eye to exactly what you want them to ask you about, because you're ready to talk about those achievements. You want to set the agenda for the interview yourself.
I like that. You're setting the agenda by scripting your CV in a certain way. That's really smart. That's really
helping them to scan it, leading their eye to where you want them to go, what you want them to focus on, those key selling points. And as I say, not just key selling points, but key differentiators. What makes you stand out? What makes you probably different from most of your peers who are also being interviewed for the same opportunity?
Yeah, good point. Does this then relate to? I'll give you a bit of a bugbear of mine is that if a client asks one of my candidates, so tell me about your career to date, I mean, that drives me insane, mainly because a lot of people don't know how to answer that question succinctly, and no one knows how to answer that question in the way that the client's expecting you to answer that question. Like, the chance of you getting this wrong is ridiculously high compared to you getting it right. Could it be a 30-second pitch? Could it be a 20-minute, drivel? Mm-hmm. It could be all sorts of things, but I guess if you've got a well-scripted, well-set-up CV, it kind of stops that question because, yes, of course, you've got to answer the question if the client does ask it, but maybe a 30-second sort of quick synopsis, and then that allows the candidate to then ask the client the question, which could be, what did you see on my CV that you liked? Or is there a particular business problem that you've got that you'd like me to speak about? Or tell me a bit about your strategy, your strat plan for the next 12 months. So yeah, using the CV as a script. Yeah, I think that's something
that question you mentioned, Mark, is one of the most common ones. Certainly a chapter in one of my books, I've got the top 10 interview questions, and I think it's probably the most common one. So tell me a bit about yourself, or talk me through your career. It's a lazy question on the interviewer's part.
I agree with that.
It's often because they're not prepared, you see. So they're, all right, okay, I don't know anything about this person. I haven't had time to read their CV. I've just got in and greeted them. So tell me about yourself. It buys them some breathing space to look down through your CV and think, what do I want to ask this person? But certainly you can try to avoid that question by making it quite obvious for them when they skim down through, okay, I see this, I see that. Okay, you facilitate that process for them. As to how to answer that question, if they do answer it, well, yeah, it's a tricky one. They don't want to hear your entire life story. They do want a synopsis. They do want essentially an elevator pitch. I'd go for more than 20 seconds, certainly. But actually, it takes us to an important point. The actual process of writing a CV, writing it yourself or writing it with a professional, either way, the process of working through it should load up your mind to be able to answer these kinds of questions much more effectively. Actually, the process of creating the CV helps to prepare you for the interview as well. It gets your brain working, thinking about what you really have to offer. And as we've discussed in the past, you and I, it's important as everyone moves on to not just bolt on their latest job to their CV. No, they need to think, where am I at now? Where am I going next? Don't just add it on. As recruiters, we see this so often. A CV which was maybe good 5 or 10 years ago, and they've bolted on a job. It spiraled out of control. And it's pitching them and sending them where they were 5 to 10 years ago, rather than where they are now and where they actually want to be going. It's a very, very common mistake.
I couldn't agree more. We find that we can see instantly if a CV is just being added to.
It looks lazy as well. It looks like they haven't made the effort, and it's just not the way to go about it. It's not going to sell them effectively. You can't just stick on another job and think that'll do it.
Yeah, I mean, we see also, I mean, first of all, I agree with you, it is completely lazy to do that. But also, it's interesting that maybe if they started their CV 10, 15 years ago, their writing style, their sentence construction, the tonality of the words, the flow of the words is often very different to what it is now.
And not to mention the design, the style, the layout, etc. It will look dated. And as a recruiter sitting with stacks of CVs, or well, obviously these days more likely on a screen, it stands out a mile.
So, answer me a question, slightly different subject, answer me a question, but probably the question that I get asked the most, or maybe comments that I get very often is, Mark, I've rewritten the CV and it's great and it's on 2 pages. Now, there's a whole thing around how long should a CV be, now we've got technology coming into this as well, and technology doesn't care if it's 1 page or 60 pages, but obviously people do, and you've got to sit in front of someone for an interview. What is a good length of CV?
This is a very common question I've been asked for many, many years. It varies around the world is one answer. Some countries prefer shorter CVs. Some countries prefer longer CVs. New Zealand, Ireland, they like longer CVs generally. But these are just trends. It really does depend on the individual case. The length you need is the length that is right to sell you. You don't want superfluous information in there. You want it to remain concise. But some people, quite simply, it will take 3 or 4 pages to sell them effectively to cover everything that they have to offer, particularly at a senior level. Conversely, you get some situations where somebody, an ED for example, they might just expect to produce a 1-page summary, that too. But it's normally to sell somebody at a high level, 3-4 pages. I think the obsession as to how long the CV should be or how short it should be needs to be put aside. Look at each piece of information in the CV. Does this help to sell me? Is it to my advantage? Look at how you've worded and phrased things. Is this waffly? Can I cut it down? Can the reader go straight to what they need to know, both in initial shortlisting and, as I said earlier, for the interview as well? The right length is what is right for you as an individual, depending on your circumstances, what you've done, what has happened in your career, what you've achieved. Don't fixate on 2 pages, 3 pages, 4 pages. Work on it, and you'll find the correct natural length will come to you.
That's a great answer. And I'm going to steal that a little bit. I think I find it hard to give feedback to people what CV is. CVs are so subjective that for some people, they're really proud of the fact they've put their CV onto 2 pages. And it's really...
They've probably spent a day writing their CV and then 2 more days trying to get it down to 2 pages.
It's true. And, and I'll say to them, you've got 3 bullet points on your last role. That's it's great to have 3, but you're saying to me that you're really commercial. There's no numbers in these bullet points. And can I ask you a separate question? The bullet points that are on there in terms of your achievements, is that what you want to do next for a role? Oh no, I wouldn't want to do that again. Then why are your
they haven't thought it through from the reader's point of view, have they? They've written it for themselves rather than thinking of who their target audience is. Yeah,
I agree. And I think that's a 2-page thing. I think the person's thinking about themselves. They think they're thinking about the person that's receiving it, but they're not. The person that's receiving it, all they really want to do is learn more about you as an individual, and they want to receive from you a script for the interview, as you said earlier. I think if you achieve that when you're creating your CV, then I think you're most of the way there.
I'll just pick up on a point you made there about quantifying. Obviously, it depends on your line of work. Some achievements are more easily quantified than others in terms of pound notes, percentages, etc. But it is important to quantify where possible. Certainly, numbers often speak louder than words, but it's also important to include achievements which aren't quantifiable, softer ones like shifting an organization's mindset, going in and conducting a major change program, which has led to them thinking in a different way. You might not be able to put figures on it, but that's still a significant achievement. But obviously quantify where possible. Too many CVs have waffly statements about their achievements, and you're like, okay, really? But how exactly? Yes, it could be a talking point for interview if you get that far. They'll ask you to tell you more detail and perhaps put some numbers on it, but it's much better to give them up front. It really does strengthen those statements.
Yeah, and like we said a few times now, make it all about the person who's interviewing you. Make it all about that particular client.
What do they want?
Yeah, exactly. What do they want? And in terms of this particular podcast, I think that perhaps we should sort of start bringing it to a close. But there's also more questions that I want to ask you around LinkedIn and things like that. Maybe we can do a separate podcast on that. Maybe we can have you back.
I'd be more than happy. Yeah.
All right.
I could talk about this all day. I mean, if I did talk about it all day, we probably would get bored eventually. But I can certainly go on about this as long as you like.
I'm a recruiter. I find this stuff fascinating.
I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of words on this sort of thing. So yeah.
So to close off, maybe a bit of a summary in terms of what we spoke about. If you're an expert and you're an expert going into organizations and you're expecting clients to listen to you as an expert, maybe take some of your own advice and hire an expert to create your CV. Yeah. Okay, good summary. And then on top of that, why don't you tell people a little bit about how you can help them? Maybe if we could have a look at the book again, you did that quite quickly, and maybe it'd be nice to sort of see the cover. But tell the people who are listening a little bit more about how they can perhaps go to the James Innes group and get some support to write their CV.
Sure, that's at www.jamesinnes.group. Innes, Scottish surname, I-N-N-E-S. People often get confused with the spelling on that one. Well, my personal time is limited. I only deal with a handful of very high-level clients each week personally, but obviously I've got a lot of people working for me, and they cover people from every level, in fact. We deal with people from recent graduates right up to the very top levels, and in all sectors, and in numerous different countries now, basically. So if anybody does need help, obviously we're here for that. We normally start, so obviously people watching this, they're mainly at a senior level, so we would almost always start with a good consultation, half an hour, 45 minutes to talk through. I think the first question I normally ask is, what's the goal here? What are you trying to achieve next in your career? That is fundamental. Everything stems from that. What do you want to achieve? Yeah. The better I can understand what you're trying to achieve, the more chance I have of helping you to do that. I need to get my head really around that. The rest of the conversation is probably split evenly between trying to understand their recent past, just the past 2 or 3 years, digging down into that. This is always where the reader, the recruiter, or the potential employer, it's always where the reader's going to go first. And then I wrap it up generally, the final third, you could say, is trying to understand them as an individual. If you're going to market somebody effectively, you do need to understand them. And I can ask some fairly odd questions. I sort of ask people, what do you enjoy most about your work? And what gets you out of bed in the morning about your work? And some clients will say to me, well, what's that got to do with my CV? Well, it's got to do with me understanding who you are and then trying to get a flavor of that into the CV so it's less dry. So it does actually reflect you as an individual and perhaps gives the reader some idea of whether your mindset fits into their organization. I'll ask people, what's your leadership philosophy? How do you go about managing people? How do you handle change and transformation? And then, are you going to put that in my CV? Well, not precisely, but it informs the writing to understand what makes you tick. That's very important too.
Such an important point. I would say that after 25 years, I can read a CV. I can tell if that person's been trusted by a member of the leadership team and in what part of their career they've been trusted by them. And it's all through tonality, the words they use. If you can bring that into the CV, the more experienced recruiters out there read that and they understand it better. And the way that they communicate with the client to sort of preempt the interview is much more sincere, much more genuine. So to put feeling into a CV is so...
It's much more easily said than done, but
my God,
it is very important.
It's almost like the holy grail of it. The rest of it is, like you said, it's dry, it's skill set matching, there's no differentiator. But you start putting feeling in there in terms of style, approach, culture, things like that. The more experienced recruiters can read that, for sure.
Yeah, increasing your chances of getting to the interview in the first place, and at interview, making the whole process go much more smoothly.
Fantastic. That's a great way to end this. James, it's been great to see you. I think probably I ought to mention the fact that we've known each other for a few years. But the first time we've worked together is been quite recently, and that's been with one of our candidates. You don't know this actually, but since you've rewritten that CV, over the next 2 weeks, that particular candidate has got 3 interviews lined up with 3 different private equity firms.
I didn't know that, but I'm delighted to hear it. Music to my ears.
I don't think we would have done that without having rewritten the CV.
Music to my ears. Really pleased. It really underlines.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
It's been really good to see you again. See you. Bye.
Yes, bye-bye.